We have a pretty big yard, and it's a summer, but
Both social science classes were this was social science.
but I saw
And then the second one was modern science.
when I started in college, I was thinking, I was like, oh, it's a fun. They're so weird. Does anybody need a handout? There's a difference between having a wild animal and just kind of brought up his house and having it. Like, I would not call baby foxes
All right. Let's get started. All right, so welcome to the second CC 211 lectures. Don't remember me from last time. My name is Susanne Sreedhar, and I'm going to be giving you the lecture on Hobbes and also the lecture on Locke next week. To know about me, I'm in the philosophy department, and I work primarily on Hobbes, and by that I mean I've written a book on Hobbes. If you are curious about Hobbes, please ask me all the questions. I have a framed portrait of Hobbes in my office, and I usually bring that to this lecture, but I was afraid that it was going to get wet in the rain. So as much as I care about this class, I probably care about that portrait more, so I left it there. So I'm gonna give you a very general overview of the project, and we'll go through some of the arguments in detail. And I'm going to, as much as possible, for at least most of the class, try to adopt the Hobbesian persona, right? To kind of try to put this in terms that I think is kind of the most compelling possible. But I do, at the end, want to invite criticisms of the project, because almost no one nowadays is a Hobbesian. So even though I do research on Hobbes, I do not consider myself a Hobbesian. So I don't think that Hobbes ultimately was correct. Now, some of you might come to think that, and then we have some really interesting discussions. So even though I don't think he was ultimately correct in his conclusions, I think his project is really fascinating, endlessly fascinating, and important, and I'm hoping to convey some of that to you today. So you should have a handout. The handout's important. Read that one. Okay, so Hobbes was born in 1588. He lives to 1679. That was a very long time to live for somebody in the 17th century. He was kind of known for being like kind of unusually healthy and unusually tall. If you're curious, Leviathan is published in 1651. That's the major work. I'll be talking about one of his earlier works, but basically you need to just worry about Leviathan. So last time I gave you a very brief overview of some of the context in which Hobbes was writing, and I just want to hit some of those highlights again and add a little bit more detail. So in 1588, the year Hobbes was born, he was born in a tiny town in England called Malmesbury. Malmesbury has nothing going for it, which is why if you go there, there's a huge sign that says, "Welcome to the birthplace of Thomas Hobbes." Because that's the only thing that ever happened in Malmesbury, apparently, and that's really the only reason tourists ever go. He was born in this small town. His father was out of the picture, apparently. He was kind of the town drunk. He was raised by a single mom. And his mom told him that while she was giving birth to him, she was convinced, as were many at the time, that the Spanish Armada was about to invade. Right, that England was about to be invaded by Spain. And she was terrified. So Hobbes, in his autobiography, says he was born twin with fear. Twin with fear. And fear is going to be one of the main themes when you study Hobbes. So Hobbes himself was a fairly fearful guy. He had some reason to be, and apparently this started kind of in the womb. That's why, again, why it's interesting that he lives till a greater age than most of his time. But in terms of the context of Europe, of England at this time, fear was a pretty prevalent emotion, right? So this was, if you had to pick one word to describe early modern Europe, it would be something like insecurity. People's lives were insecure for a lot of reasons. There were plagues, there were famines, so people starved, there were rebellions, there were wars, there were civil wars, there were wars between states, there was religious persecution. It was a frightful, very tenuous time, and Hobbes is very, very much influenced by that, and it pervades his entire philosophy. As I mentioned last time, he spent the 1640s in exile in France because there was a civil war in England. As you might or might not remember, Parliament and the king went to war against each other, and this ended with Parliament chopping off the king's head. That happened in 1649. Leviathan comes out in 1651. So he's writing this in the aftermath of kind of arguably the biggest political crisis to hit England, maybe till Brexit. But so it was a huge crisis, and this is the book that he writes kind of in the aftermath of that. So what is the project? So the project is to give a political theory, right, or a political philosophy. And so he sets out a system of politics for you. It starts, though, with a kind of conception of human beings, and actually not human beings as such, but thoughts, right? What is sense? The first chapter is on sense. What is sense? What is imagination? What is memory? What is reason? What is speech? Finally, he gets to individuals, and then he gets to the state. The project is to give you an argument for a certain conception of political theory. So he's going to argue that the best form of government is an absolute monarchy. A king or queen who has absolute, undivided, unlimited power, who is accountable to no human being. That's the conclusion, right? That's the project. But the way that he does that is different from the way anybody else did that. So he doesn't appeal to religion, although there are references to Christianity in the text. The argument is supposed to be entirely secular. And as we talked about a little bit about last time, he's what's called a methodological individualist, right? So he builds this picture of the state out of a picture of what individuals are like in themselves and how they interact with each other. And he wants this to be in the spirit of a geometric proof, where it kind of proceeds by definitions logically to reach this conclusion. And if you agree with him on all the steps, you have to accept his conclusion, which again is absolute monarchy. So if you don't want to accept that, you're going to need to find something wrong with his argument. So one other feature of the project that I think is important here is, and this is my word, not Hobbes. Actually, this is Richard Tuck's word. Richard Tuck is a professor of government at Harvard who also studies Hobbes. This is his word. He says Hobbes is a minimalist, and here's what he means by that. Hobbes is writing to people who are entrenched in various religious, political, ideological debates, right? That they are loaded with disagreement. And he is trying to give a theory that's acceptable to all of them. And the strategy is to be minimalist. So he wants to start with the most minimal definitions, the most minimal conception of human nature, the most minimal conception of morality, in order to get people to agree. So the purpose of Leviathan is to try to garner agreement from the readers. So the idea is that you all might, not you all, his 17th century readers, you all might hate each other, right? Some of you are Protestants, some of you are Catholics, some of you are latitudinarians or Unitarians, and there were many, many sects of Protestantism. Some of you are Republicans, some of you are Royalists, you hate each other and you think you disagree about everything. So if there's going to be a theory of politics that can actually speak to everybody, it has to have very minimal presuppositions. Suppositions that any rational person would accept. Or I think actually, to put it more precisely, presuppositions that no rational person could reject. Right, so he wants to give you these kind of arguments that are supposed to kind of appeal to you as rational agent that you can't find reason to reject. And we're going to see that happen a bunch of different times. So that's what I mean by minimalism. If that term is helpful, use it. If not, don't worry about it. Okay, so given all of that, what is the argument? All right, so there are lots of different ways to reconstruct the argument, and I actually want to start by looking at a quotation where it seems to me like he's giving the argument in miniature, or at least a large part of the argument in miniature, and it's quotation number 1 on your handout. So this is in chapter 5 of Leviathan, which is on reason, on human reason. What is reason? So he has a conception of reason, his reason is reckoning, but he has a very, very vivid description of disagreement, of controversy here. So I want to look at this quote and break down a little bit. So he says, as in arithmetic, unpracticed men must, and professors themselves, often err and cast up false. Right, stop. What does that mean? In arithmetic, most of the most practiced men, even professors, can err and cast up false. That's it. Much better way of putting it than Hobbes does, right? She said, in math, people make mistakes, even the most experienced people. This was in the time before calculators. So you can imagine if people are adding large sums, that they're going to make a mistake, even if they're professors of mathematics. I know, professors can make, I don't make mistakes, but I've heard professors make mistakes. Okay, so even in arithmetic, right, which has right and wrong answers, people can make mistakes. Anybody want to get off now? Right, gonna get off the Hobbes train? No. Okay, so this is minimalist. He's trying to say, of course you agree with this. But it's also like this in any other subject of reasoning. The ablest, most attentive, and most practiced men may deceive themselves and infer false conclusions. No, not but that reason itself is always right reason, as well as arithmetic is a certain infallible art. But here's the kicker. But no one man's reason, nor the reason of any one number of men, makes the certainty. No more than an account is therefore well cast up, because a great many men have unanimously approved it. All right, what does it mean to say that no one man's reason, or the reason of any number of people, makes the certainty? Even if it's unanimous, it doesn't make the certainty. Why? Yeah. Okay, good. This is exactly right. Even if a lot of people agree with something, that doesn't make it right. Can you think of an example where a lot of people thought something was true and they were wrong?
The earth is flat.
Yeah, people thought the earth was flat. They were wrong. They thought that the sun revolved around the earth. They were wrong. Okay, this is, again, these are supposed to be pretty plausible things to say. And therefore, when there's a controversy in any account, the parties must, by their own accord, set up for right reason, the reason of some arbitrator or judge to whose sense they will both stand, or their controversy must either come to blows or be decided, or be undecided. So, given this thing about reasoning and no one man's reasoning or lots of people's reasoning can make a certainty, because what that means is that when there's a controversy, there's only 3 things that can happen if there's a controversy, if there's a disagreement. There's only 3 things. What are the 3 things? What's one of the 3 things? I just read it to you. It's an interactive class. Yeah. Good, they can come to blows. That happens. Yeah? Right? People disagree about some, so they can come to blows. Good. What's another thing that can happen? Yeah.
It ends up undecided.
It ends up undecided. Or, yeah. They come to an agreement. Good. What do they come to an agreement about, though? The language is a little confusing. The parties, by their own accord, must set up for right reason the reason of some arbitrator or judge to whose sentence they will both stand. What are they agreeing to? Yeah.
And a third party to mediate.
A third party to mediate, an arbitrator, a judge, a referee. Those are the only 3 things that can happen if there's a controversy. It goes undecided, comes to blows, or the parties agree on a third party judge But notice the thing about the third party judge. They agree to stand by the judgment of the third party, to take it as right reason, but not because it's correct. Right? The reason of the arbitrator is not necessarily, actually, we have no reason to believe that it is any more correct than the reason of the parties. So what does it mean to call it right reason?
It's like what's agreed on and what's established.
Yes, okay, good. So they agree to say whatever it is that the arbitrator says goes. This should be familiar to you. This is what happens with referees in sports, right? The referee makes a call and the parties abide by it, even if they think that call is wrong. Right? The call of the referee, that's what gets to be right reason. Not because it's right, meaning correct, but because the parties agreed that they would treat it as right reason. For Hobbes, basically there's no such thing as right reason, for the most part, especially in politics. All there are people having their own individual reasoning, disagreeing, and then, hopefully, he wants us to, set up an arbitrator and we say, okay, whatever the arbitrator says, we're going to treat as right reason, we're going to treat it as authoritative. What is that? That's Hobbes' political theory in a nutshell. There are 100 other really important details, but that's the crux of it. That if people are disagreeing, that either the disagreement goes undecided. That's really hard in politics. You can't actually have a political system where things don't get decided. Or they go to war, or they set up an arbitrator and they agree to whatever the arbitrator says. That's what Hobbes thinks, how Hobbes thinks politics functions. Good. Okay, so now into the specifics of the argument. How is he going to make that argument about arithmetic and reason carry over to politics? So he starts with, and what he's most famous for is this claim that the state of nature is a state of war. So there's a lot to unpack there. This is chapter 13 of Leviathan, the most famous chapter. The first thing he's got to do is define all of these terms. So, first thing to note, the state of nature is not defined as a state of war at all. In fact, his argument is that the state of nature ends up being a state of war. It will be a state of war, but it's not defined like that. Rather, the state of nature is defined, in quotation number 2, as the condition people find themselves in without a common power to keep them all in awe. It's a very Hobbesian way of putting it, this idea of awe. So without a power to keep them all in awe, without a government, without a sovereign. So it's a condition of anarchy. It's a condition where no one's in charge. That's the state of nature. Or the natural condition of mankind. Right? What people are like without a government. And what he wants to argue over the course of chapter 13 is that what life will be like without a government is war. But he means something very specific by war, which I have put in quotation number 3. So he says, here's how he defines war, again, Hobbes defining everything. So he says, war consists not in battle only, or the act of fighting. The war does not consist in battle or fighting. That's what does it consist of, then? But in a tract of time wherein the will to contend by battle is sufficiently known. And therefore the notion of time is to be considered in the nature of war as it is in the nature of weather. Whereas the nature of foul weather lieth not in a shower or two of rain, but in an inclination thereto of many days together. So the nature of war consists not in actual fighting, but in the known disposition thereto during all the time there's no assurance to the contrary. All else is peace. Okay, so war does not consist in fighting. In fact, you can have a war where there's no fighting at all. Rather, war is like foul weather. Is that happen?
Well, in this case, he's considered like everybody's very selfish, so they're fighting for their own resources. And because humans are inherently selfish, they fight for resources to sustain themselves. And because there's no order, it's in the state of peace, it always continues.
Okay, good. So this is the general idea, right? That without a government, people will fight each other, right? Over resources, over a number of different things. But he's not committed to saying that they actually fight, that it actually is battle. So he doesn't think that battle is necessary for there to be a war. But rather war doesn't consist in actual fighting, but in the known disposition thereto. Yeah.
But it's like in the air and it can break out at any minute because of virus.
Okay, good. It's in the air, it could break out any minute. You can't trust that it won't happen. Good. The Cold War might be a good example of this, right? Where people this is called a war, right? Even though there weren't battles, properly speaking, because there was a known disposition to fight. Each side knew that the other side, had their finger near the button. So that's what war is, right? It's in the air, like foul weather. You can have foul weather and have it never actually rain. It's foul because it might rain at any time. That's what war is for Hobbes. Okay, so what he has to show to you is that a condition without a government is a condition of war, where there's this known disposition to fight. That's not obvious, right? He takes himself as actually having to demonstrate that to you. You might think, and Rousseau is going to think this, that without a government, people are peaceful. They get along. Maybe they're cooperative and live in small families. Maybe they're solitary and just go off on their own. But he thinks that people don't fight in the state of nature, not primarily. You could think that the state of nature is like the Garden of Eden, right? It's a land of milk and honey. There's no fighting. Hobbes is like, nope. I'm going to show you why the state of nature has to be a state of war. It has to be, like, kind of logically. He wants to convince you of that. And so, there's a couple more assumptions in this. So in the state of nature, you have equality. What Hobbes means by equality is not what we usually mean by equality. For Hobbes, everybody is equal in the state of nature because everybody is equally vulnerable to death. He says, even the weakest can kill the strongest if he, employs secret machinations, right, or enters into a confederacy with other people, sneak all of the weak people together, team up to try to kill the strongest. No one is so strong or so smart that they're invulnerable in the state of nature. We're equally vulnerable to death. That's what he means by equality. From that, because we're all equal in that sense, where there's an equality of hope. All of us can hope that we can get the things that we might want. But what is it that people want? So he says there are three human motivations relevant in the state of nature. Or three things that people might be motivated to try to pursue. There's glory, right? So some people want glory. They want reputation. They want status. They want honor. They want other people to acknowledge them as superior. I mean, come on. Let's not kid ourselves. That's a nice thing to want, right? That's a good thing to have. Who doesn't want glory? They want gain. This was your point. They want resources. They want stuff. And they want security. This is what he calls diffidence. And sometimes it's helpful, I think, thinking about Hobbes' state of nature, to think of these as three kinds of motivations, but you can also think of them as three kinds of people. And when scholars try to formalize Hobbes' argument, which they do, and if you've ever taken a game theory class, this tends to come up. They say, look, we can say there's three kinds of people. There's people who want glory, right? They want status. They want to be higher than somebody else. There's people who want stuff, right? The greedy people. And then there's people who just want to be left alone, like who just want to take care of themselves and not be threatened. Now, it's easy to see how if everybody was a glory seeker, right, if everybody wanted glory, there would be fighting in the state of nature. You wouldn't even need, there wouldn't be actual fighting, right? Because perhaps the ways that people attain status over one another is to fight about it. Not everybody can win the gold medal, right? Not everybody can be on top. So people fight for glory. They also fight for gain, right? That they fight for resources, for stuff in the state of nature, like food. So it's easy to see why for these kinds of motivations or these kinds of people, the state of nature would be a warlike place, right? These are the kinds of things that bring people into conflict. But what Hobbes wants to show, I think this is the real kicker of his argument, is that even for the diffident people, even for the peace-loving people who just want to be left alone in quiet, even for them, it's going to be rational to be warlike. That's the argument he has to give you. And you might think, well, wait a minute, if all I want is my own security, why am I'm not going to pick other people. What I want is peace. So, he gives you an argument for that. And this is quotation number 4. So, diffidence also means distrust. We don't use the term diffident that much anymore. For Hobbes, it can mean both a desire for security and kind of related distrust of other people. But he says, great, so from this diffidence of one another, or for the diffident person, you could say, there's no way for any man to secure himself so reasonable as anticipation. That is, by force or wiles to master the person of all men, he can, so long as he sees no other power great enough to endanger him. Why would somebody who's motivated by diffidence, right? They just want to be left alone, they're distrustful of other people. Why would it be reasonable for that person to anticipate? Okay, good. So they anticipate breaches of their security, and then what do? They yeah, okay, right. So have you heard the phrase, the best defense is a good offense? Right, so the diffident people are defensive, right? Like they only care about their own self-preservation. They don't want to be around other people. But for them, the best way, the most reasonable way for them to secure their own self-preservation is to anticipate. To strike first, or to be prepared to strike first. Why? Why is it reasonable for them to anticipate? What happened if they didn't anticipate? Yeah.
If someone has power over you, then there's always the chance that they might take advantage of it.
Okay, good. Well, so if you're diffident, right? You're peace-loving, you want to be left alone, and you don't take the necessary precautions, what's going to happen to you in the state of nature?
You might get robbed, killed.
Yeah, right? You're going to get attacked and taken advantage of by other people. So given that you only care about your own security and your own self-preservation, what's rational for you to do is to be armed to the teeth. In fact, if you're not armed to the teeth, it's irrational, right? It's contrary to your self-preservation. So even if you never ever want to fight another human being ever, it's rational for you to always be prepared for war, and also sometimes to anticipate, to strike first. Right? So, but not because you want to conquer somebody else, right? But just because you want to stay alive. Is that argument convincing? In the state of nature, even people who don't want to fight will be moved by rationality to be prepared to fight at any time? We can model this for you in game theory if we had more time. People kind of spend a lot of time showing that it's actually a principle of rationality to act like this. So, because it does that these people are acting in ways that they don't want to have to act, right? They don't want to fight. But they are moved to fight just out of concern for their own safety. And once Hobbes has that claim, that even those who just want safety are going to be warlike, he thinks he has now definitively demonstrated that the state of nature is a state of war. Because even for the Pacific people, right, even for the peace-loving people, those people will be warlike. They have to be in order to survive. So it will be, as he says, a war of all against all, of each person against every other person. And it doesn't mean that there's fighting all the time. What it means is that everybody is always ready to fight. That's the claim, right? That everybody is always ready to fight. Like foul weather, it could rain at any time. It didn't actually rain during the walk from my office here. I could have brought you that portrait, but I was worried it was going to rain, so it didn't. It's that kind of thing. Like everybody's constantly preoccupied by the possibility that there's violence. everybody is preoccupied by the possibility of violence, and specifically violence against them, that has serious consequences. So he has, and this is probably the most famous passage in Hobbes, is kind of consequences of war. This is the cocktail party version. For the cocktail parties that you go to where people say, hey, what do you think about Thomas Hobbes? Now you'll have something to say. So he says in this quotation number 5, he says, whatsoever therefore is consequent to a time of war where every man is enemy to every man, the same is consequent to the time where men live without other security than what their own strength and invention shall furnish them withal. In such a condition, there can be no place for industry, because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently, no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea. That's going to include tea for the British, so that's really important. Tea was imported by sea. In the state of nature, there is no tea. If you're a coffee drinker, feel free to imagine it without coffee. There's no commodious building. There's no instruments of moving and removing things that require much force. There's no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death. And, here's the famous quote, the life of man, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Those are the words that Hobbes is known for, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. That's what life is like without a government. But hang on, why exactly? Why can there be no arts, no letters, no society? Why can there be no industry? There's no universities in a state of nature. It's terrible, yeah.
If we don't trust each other, we can't work together to decide.
Okay, so what she said is if we don't trust each other, right, because we're afraid everybody's going to attack us, we can't work together. We can't cooperate. Right, so that's a huge reason. There's no cooperation in the state of nature. In fact, it's irrational to cooperate. You have to put your weapons down. And without cooperation, without human cooperation, very little can get accomplished. Think of all the things that you like in this world. Movies, chocolate, pizza, learning, books, tacos. None of that would be possible without cooperation. You can't produce any of that stuff by yourself. Right? There has to be lots and lots and lots of cooperation that's kind of institutionalized in order to have any of it. Right? So there can be no cooperation. And he puts this in terms of industry, right? That there's no place for industry. And he gives a reason that even the people who might fancy themselves industrious in the state of nature are not going to be industrious. So flip your handout over. Quotation number 6. He says, where an invader has no more to fear than another man's single power, if one plant, sow, build, or possess a convenient seat, others may probably be expected to come prepared with forces united to dispossess and deprive him, not only of the fruits of his labor, but also of his life or liberty. So let's say you're in the state of nature and you're like, you know what would be great? Some shelter from this rain. Ah, there's a cave. That's convenient. I'm gonna call this cave my home. I'm gonna collect some firewood and build a fire. I'm gonna collect some berries and keep them in my cave. That will make my life so much easier. Hobbes is like, you, person who want to do that, you're a fool. That's an incredibly stupid thing to do. Way better to sit out in the rain and be hungry. Why? Because the person who builds or sows, right, or possesses a convenient seat, convenient place, invites invasion by others to come take that stuff. Because the invader has no more to fear than the cave dweller's own power. So now, in civil society, we don't take each other's stuff for the most part because we have something to fear, namely the police. But in the state of nature, there's no police to call, right? So if you're thinking about being industrious, and Locke is going to call this mixing your labor with things in the external world to make stuff, right? If you're thinking about doing that in the state of nature, Hobbes is like, you're an idiot. Don't do that. Right? All you're doing is making yourself a target. So life, solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. People don't live long in the state of nature. I mean, imagine, like, if every person is enemy to every other person, and you have to provide for all of your needs by yourself, how long do you think you would last? I believe they make reality television shows out of some of this. So that is the crux of Hobbes' argument that the state of nature is a state of war. Without that argument, the rest of the political theory doesn't get off the ground. So I want to see if there are kind of questions about that. Yeah.
So when he says solitary, does that like preclude like families that structures are already there? It's not like they're just leaving children out there.
Such a good question, such a good question. So in chapter 13, which is the chapter on the state of nature where this argument is, he talks about it as a war of all against all, of each person against every other person. There's no family, there's no community. Later on in Leviathan, he talks about what scholars sometimes call an advanced state of nature. Right? People aren't in civil society yet, but they're not in that, this is usually the pure state of nature. And where there can be families and small clans. And he has an argument to show that even though people can, especially because of familial relationships, cooperate in some minimal way in the state of nature because of families, that doesn't provide anything like real security, and it doesn't provide the kind of security you would need for something like industry, which is the basis for everything else, the things you might want out of life. Because, here's very briefly how the argument goes, he says, look, so he calls them confederacies. If there's a confederacy, a bunch of people in the state of nature agree to band together for their own safety. So if that confederacy is successful, right, it's successful at banding together for its own safety such that it can repel external threats, think of it as like a gang of sorts. The minute that it's safe from external threats, there will be infighting because there's no one in charge. The minute you have a person in charge, you're in civil society for Hobbes. You're no longer in the state of nature. Right? State of nature is when there's no authority, right? No common power to keep us in awe. So if you have a kind of gang of equals, right? He says that can last for a little while, but it can't last for very long because people will start jockeying for power. So what you need is a government, like with institutions. But yeah. It's probably better to be in a situation where there are these small confederacies than in the pure state of nature, but he still thinks it's pretty bad. Okay, so one objection that people raised to Hobbes at his time and still do today that he addresses right away is that, look, people in this argument, right, reading this argument, they think that I believe that human beings are evil, right? That they're selfish, not just self-interested, but they're selfish, that they're bad. And he's like, I do not believe that at all. He denies, but he's given this incredibly pessimistic version of what people would be like if you took a government away, and then he says, but I think that actually people aren't bad at all. And he gives you an argument that not only does his kind of conception of human nature one that doesn't include any kind of premise about human beings being evil, he thinks his conception of human nature is one that all of you already, his readers, but also all of you, accept. So he says, you might be suspicious, you think people wouldn't act like that in a state of nature. People are much better than you give them credit for, Hobbes. You're such a downer. He's like, no. He says, my account I'll yell louder.
No, you're fine, but people are talking in the back.
Stop chattering. Unless you're chattering about Hobbes, in which case do that after class.
Thanks.
So he says, look, you already agree with me. This is quotation number 7. Quotation number 7 might be one of my favorites. So he said, he's talking to the person who thinks, oh, Hobbes, no, you're too pessimistic about people. And here's what Hobbes says. Let him consider with himself. When taking a journey, he arms himself and seeks to go well accompanied. When going to sleep, he locks his doors. Even in his house, he locks his chests. And this when he knows there be laws and public officers armed to revenge all injuries that shall be done to him. What opinion he has of his fellow subjects when he rides armed, of his fellow citizens when he locks his doors, of his children and servants when he locks his chests? Does he not there as much accuse mankind by his actions as I do by my words? But neither of us accuses man's nature in it. Okay, so when you came to school today, did you lock your door on the way out? Yeah? No? And what's your address? You rode your bike, did you lock it up? When you go to the GSU and you're working on your computer, do you leave it there, go to class and come back? No. And we have laws. Boston University has its own police department that's charged with keeping you all safe and keeping your stuff safe. Even so, you don't trust other people so much that you want to leave your front door wide open, or like leave your stuff around. And he says, don't you accuse mankind by those actions as much as I do, Hobbes. Now, for those of you who did lock your door, is that because you think that all other people are evil and are going to steal your stuff the first chance they get? Yes? Okay, well, you might be the pessimist that some people think Hobbes is.
I'm a realist.
A realist. Yeah, no, Hobbes, I would think he's a realist. But do you really, when you lock your door, do you really think every other person out there is bad and out to get you? No. What do you think?
All it takes is one person.
All it takes is one person. That's exactly right. All it takes is one. You can think, actually, people are generally quite good, right, and beneficent. But if there's one person out there who is greedy or glory-seeking, right, or bad in some way, then it's rational for you to lock your doors. That's Hobbes' conception of human nature, right? That actually it might be that most people are okay, but because we know that everybody isn't good, right? That there's some people out there that are going to take advantage if they have the opportunity. We take precautions against everybody. Now, in the state of nature, what's on the line is not, your computer or the stuff in your apartment. It's your life. So even if you think that most people are kind of generally moral, you still have to act with that one potentially bad person in mind.